Welcome, everybody. Thank you all so much for coming. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Daniel Brzezinski. I am a teacher in the Department of English and Latin American Latino Studies, and I direct our Center for Latinx Literature of the Americas. Come on in. I know about maybe less than half of you, so thank you for all of those who I don't know for coming. I know some of you are from Professor Vagi's class, and she canceled class today, so I appreciate that all those of you who came as well. And so this is our Latinx Literature Now Festival, Day 1. If you haven't registered for tomorrow, please go ahead and do so. We'll be in the Institute for the Humanities from 11 to 3. And get there early. Lots of people have registered. So I'm not going to do very formal introductions today. We'll do more of that tomorrow. But I will introduce very, very briefly our guests. But the way our format is going to work today is we want this to be a little more conversational. Come on in. We want this to be more conversational with a little bit of performance mixed in. So all of the writers and artists will give very brief artistic presentations. We'll do those in kind of groups of 2. And then between all of those things, we're just going to open it up for questions and then go back to have more readings. So there'll be time for your own questions and to converse with everybody. But our focus for this year's event is translation, performance, documentary. Our kind of general overriding idea at the Center for Latinx Literature of the Americas is that we're interested in what a literature of the Americas means and what that means for both Latin America, for both the United States, and how those things go together. And each of our guests today is in a good position to speak to all of those things. So without too much more, I'm going to get started. So our guests today from left to right, coming, we have 2 special guests from Puerto Rico, Roque Raquel Salas Rivera, poet, translator, archivist, editor, performer, and many more things beyond that, with Aurelio Lima Davila, who is an actor and is... And tomorrow, the 2 of them will be, well, they'll tell you about their performance, but they will be performing a bit more depth tomorrow. Coming from Providence, Rhode Island, and originally from Peru, Giancarlo Huapaya, poet, translator, community artist, editor, publisher of Cardboard House Press, which is an amazing press that is that Giancarlo can also tell you more about, but is involved in, first of all, just publishes beautiful, wonderful books, also involved in bookmaking and makes very beautiful book art objects, both for the press and in community settings. Cecilia Vicuña, Cecilia, performer, poet, painter, sculptor, filmmaker, artist. I have introduced Cecilia in so many different venues and have so much to say. But thank you for being here. Cecilia has only published 7 books this year. And if we add that, come on in. If we add that to her career's worth of books, it is in the many dozens. And Cecilia has had major exhibits in the last 2 years at the Tate in London, at the Guggenheim in New York, at the Venice Biennale as well in Santiago, Chile, and throughout the world. and Susan Briante and Farid Matouk, both coming from Tucson, poets, essayists, editors, community activists involved in particular. It would be great to hear about the work you're doing at the border with migrant justice as well. So we'll begin with readings from Susan and then Aurelio and Roque, and then we'll open it up to chat.
There. You can just. Okay.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you all for coming. Hopefully not under too much coercion. Thank you, Em, for your work getting us here. I'm going to start by reading just a short passage from my most recent book that came out in 2020, Defacing the Monument. And I'm going to read a narration of witnessing an Operation Streamline hearing in Tucson, Arizona, in which migrants are sort of sentenced in mass to the crime of unlawful entry to the United States. The word economic does not appear in the text of the Department of Homeland Security's webpage entitled Obtaining Asylum in the United States. It is not uttered into the court record. The word economic remains in my mouth, at the back of the courtroom where I sit scribbling on a legal pad, trying to trace a relation to the 7 men who stand before the judge shackled at the wrists, waists, and ankles. The body is a condition, the nation another. I used to believe the document tethered the poem to the earth, to soil that one could taste, that could be nutrient to more than one. But a document can pull a nation out from under you. In the U.S. District Court, Arizona District, shackles chime like the rigging of a ship in harbor in the moments before a voyage. 7 men approach the bench. One by one, they speak directly into the microphone. To become a name in a document, a few words in the record, and 1 syllable of consent. Do you understand the rights that you are giving up, the consequences of pleading guilty, and the terms of your written plea agreement? Are you pleading guilty voluntarily and of your own free will? Are you a citizen of the United States? On or about March 17, 2017, did you enter the United States from Mexico, near Nogales, without coming through a designated port of entry? How do you plead to the charge of illegal entry? Do you understand the rights that you are giving up, the consequences of pleading guilty, and the terms of your written plea agreement? Are you pleading guilty voluntarily and of your own free will? Are you a citizen of the United States? On or about March 18, 2017, did you enter the United States from Mexico near Lukeville without coming through a designated port of entry? How do you plead to the charge of illegal entry? Do you understand the rights that you are giving up, the consequences of pleading guilty, and the terms of your written plea agreement? Are you pleading guilty voluntarily and of your own free will? Are you a citizen of the United States? On or about March 14, 2017, did you enter the United States from Mexico near Sasabe without coming through a designated port of entry? How do you plead to the charge of illegal entry? The court calendar for Operation Streamline proceedings includes a defendant's name, date of arrest, their lawyer's name, the charges they face, their English language competency. The complete calendar for the day extends 10 pages. But it does not tell us what spiraled and scurried in the wake of these travelers, what screamed and cried, what debt, what tender, what moans. Most migrants are permitted to add only 3 words to the court record: yes, no, and guilty.
Hola. Esto para línea. Me entendí. Hola, buenas tardes. Hi, good afternoon. Estoy aquí con Aurelio Lima Dávila, actor, histrión, ¿verdad? Activista cultural y también el hijo de Ángela María Dávila, que es la poeta que vamos a estar leyendo de su trabajo hoy, y yo voy a estar leyendo las traducciones mías al inglés. Así que, ready.
Sí. Vamos de lleno.
Vamos de lleno.
Quiero decir algo primero. Hola, bendiciones. En el nombre del Gran Espíritu de la Diosa Madre, en el nombre del Gran Espíritu del Dios Padre, en el nombre de todos nuestros seres de luz que nos acompañan y de nuestro espíritu interior, de cada uno, de nuestra divinidad. Bendiciones y agradecidos estamos aquí. Mi madre nunca tradujo, por muchas razones. Y sé que si estuviera viva, estuviera al lado de Roque, aquí leyendo. Hermanos, hermanas, hace tiempo que una paloma triste nos deletrea la guerra contra el árbol. Hace muchos caminos y uno solo que la canción oscura y temerosa nos detiene la lluvia en la garganta. Y tanta mano triste nos da risa y nos regula el llanto y nos hace llorar desordenadamente y tropezamos con pájaros viejísimos, con espejos gastados con la prisa. Sobre cada crepúsculo escribimos la historia que no ha sido. El mar nos recomienda siempre implacable y siempre el dolor de la estrella vivida en la penumbra sobre cada crepúsculo, sobre cada camino de esta tierra que nunca comprendemos y esperamos. Bifurcamos sonrisas, mutilamos la misma del sueño y los signos en la noche que declaran el camino de agua del mar oloroso y profundo, espantando el espanto cotidiano de la cárcel de historia. Hermanos, hermanas, qué caravana oscura y sigilosa de lagartos legítimos nos anuncia los días de insectos abundantes cuando el sol y el horizonte largo que todos conocemos y el edificio claro y el olor de sonrisas redondas se nos pongan de acuerdo. Disculpen, se me olvidó el epígrafe. Es muy importante. Pensando en esta isla que tanto nos duele. Ángela María Dávila.
Thinking of this island of ours that hurts so much. Brothers and sisters, for a while now a sad dove has spelled out war against the tree. For many paths now and only one, for the dark and fearful song has dammed the rain in our throat, and so many sad hands give us laughter, or regulate our tears, or make us cry chaotically. We stumble on very old birds, with mirrors worn by haste. On each twilight we write the history that never was. The sea recommends us, always implacable, and always the pain of that star was lived in umbra. Upon each twilight, upon each earthly path, that we never understand and expect, we bifurcate smiles, we mutilate the same moon that dictates the dream, the nocturnal signs declaring the sea water's path, fragrant and deep, horrifying off the daily horror, inspired by history's prison. Brothers and sisters, what dark and sly caravan of legitimate lizards announces the days of teeming insects, when the sun and the long horizon we all know, and the clear building and the scent of rounded smiles, all suddenly agree. Amaya.
Yeah. Apresuradamente se buscan cosas hondas y se le miran las comisuras a la muerte. Apresuradamente se camina en silencio entre paredes sin ver sus materiales. Se camina con ruido por dentro del silencio, sin detenerse a oír sus voces húmedas. Con muchísima prisa se desvive y se desvive uno por vivir, por triturar la ausencia de las cosas que existen sin tocar nuestros ojos, por encontrar canales de luz entre las sombras, por tropezar con sombras en la calle ganándose la vida con la muerte. Con tanta prisa se amontonan palabras sobre huevos, sobre huecos, y se abren huecos sobre las palabras. Se seca uno el sudor. De pronto descubres con asombro que hay un zapato viejo en una calle, tuvo su pie, una muñeca rota sin su niña, que te mira desde aquel zafacón sin ajoro ninguno, porque murió su muerte imaginaria, y más murió la gente construyéndola. ¿Quién sabe de la niña? Esa sombra de al lado puede que tenga una mirada dulce o hueca y hasta ojos, y quizás te ame un poco o te odie sin saberlo desde la impuesta lejanía de unos pocos metros. Pieles intactas sin estrenar vehículo cambiado por barrera. Miras aquella esquina, una cuchara hermosa te sorprende. Otro objeto cualquiera desprendido de su espacio en el aire se instala en tu existencia recordándote que un compañero humano, compañera humana lo hizo. A veces, una moneda incomprensible te sirve de algo. Alguien te tira palabras en la frente con una cerbatana poderosa, con un taladro duro, y desliza palabras en tu oído mirándote de frente por detrás de los ojos. Es bueno verse al dorse de los ojos. En algún ojo ajeno aunque haya paja. Ya tal vez más despacio le ves las comisuras a la muerte con el rabo del ojo. Aquella flor aparece conocida porque te dice cosas. Te fijas en que hay tierra, cosas bajo tus pies, además del progreso que se vive, y te inventas un baile para dar ese salto tenebroso hacia la luz, hacia la risa y hacia la dolencia, para abolir las muertes cotidianas, para mirar la vida frente a frente, aunque tal vez le veas solamente perfil en horizonte. De golpe entras en el amor, tal vez apresuradamente. Te sorprendes amando muchas cosas con una prisa diferente, descubriendo canales de sombra entre la luz, la soledad ajena, la de todos, la de todas, el hambre de compartir el tiempo de otro modo, el hambre de saber, el hambre. Y cuando lentamente ves que miras, la lágrima es más diáfana, la sonrisa se hace más certera, se confunde uno menos o más y más o menos, se funde con la audacia tal vez el miedo atroz que da desconocer lo conocido, conocer que desconoces todo para siempre, saber que sabes saber lo suficiente para temblar de amor, para inventar palabras que desafían a la sombra, para mirar de cerca la mirada, la piel, los intestinos, la angustia, la alegría del de enfrente. Con cuánta prisa se desvive, cuánto cuesta caminar muy deprisa, lentamente.
Frantically, deep things are sought, and the commissars of death are examined. Frantically, one walks in silence between walls without seeing their raw materials. One walks within silence, making noise without stopping to hear its humid voices. With such haste, one undoes death and is dying to live, to shred the absence of things existing without touching our eyes, to find light canals buried in shadow, to trip on shadows in the street, earning a living, hustling death. With so much haste, the words heap together over hollows, and the hollows open over words, drying one's sweat. Astonished, one suddenly discovers that there's an old shoe in a street. It had its foot. A broken doll without her girl that stares at you from that trash can without a hint of haste, because it died its imaginary death, and people died even more to make it. Who knows what happened to the girl? The next door shadow might have been a sweet and hollow gaze and even eyes, and maybe it loves you some, or hates you unawares. From the imposed distance of a few meters, skins intact, without a premier vehicle exchanged for a barrier, you stare into that corner, surprised by a beautiful spoon. Another random object dislodged from its space in the air installs itself in your existence, a reminder that a human compañero made it. Sometimes An incomprehensible coin is good for something. Someone throws words at your forehead with a powerful blowgun, with a hard drill, or slips words in your ears staring at you from behind your eyes. It's good to see the back of one's own eyes in a brother's eye, even if it has a mote. And perhaps now, at greater length, you see death's commissures from the corner of your eye. That flower looks familiar because it tells you things. You notice there is soil, things under your feet, besides the progress you make, and you invent a dance in order to leap tenebrously towards light, toward laughter, and toward what ails to abolish the daily deaths, to stare life in the face, even if sometimes you only catch a profile on the horizon. Abruptly, you enter love, perhaps too frantically. You surprise yourself by loving many things with different haste, discovering shadow canals amongst the light, the stranger's solitude belonging to all, the hunger for sharing time differently, the hunger for knowledge, the hunger. And when you slowly notice you're looking, the tear is more diaphanous, the smile is more unerring, one is more or less confused, and less or more is fused with audacity, perhaps the atrocious fear of not knowing the known, knowing that you don't know everything forever, knowing that you know how to know enough to tremble with love, to invent words that defy shadows, to stare at length at the stare, skin, intestines, anguish, the joy of he who sits opposite, how frantically we give away life, how costly it becomes to walk with haste, unhurriedly.
So I'll just start us off, and you guys keep the mic, I think. Thank you all so much. I think is this the first time that was read? Yeah, the world premiere. Puedes contar un poco sobre la historia del libro. We talk a little bit anche la the history of the book, her context, place in Puerto Rican and Latin American writing, and yeah.
La pregunta es para ti.
Yo grabé los dos.
Ok. Es que dijiste algo en inglés al último que no entendí.
No, para hablar nomás del contexto de la obra de tu mamá, de literatura contemporánea.
Ok. Una vez más, gracias. Ángela María Dávila Mate es una poeta puertorriqueña, boricua, de Higuera, una cuentista. Sí.
Ángela María Dávila Malavé is a Puerto Rican poet whose background is she was poor, she was black, she was socialist, she was feminist, humanist.
Iba a ser gay, a tratar de masticar. Está chévere, esto es sanación. Entonces, ella empieza su existencia como poeta en la década de los 60, en un grupo muy importante de lucha artística en el país que se llama el Grupo Guajal.
So she begins her sort of organizing as a poet, or her activity as a poet, in the 60s in a very important poetic group that was called El Grupo Guajana, or the Guajana Group, or Guajana Generation.
Y bien pronto, bien jovencita, era muy joven, 19, 18 años, resalta su poesía dentro de lo que estaba pasando, dentro de la comunidad poética. Y hasta cierto punto, esto quizás es una opinión subjetiva, pero no lo es. Es el batón de Julia. Se encarga, ella se compromete con el camino de Julia y con el compromiso de Julia con la poesía, y ella lo adopta, lo asume.
So she quickly sort of like standing out and shining, her own work, but in a sense, there's a very clear continuity, and she sort of takes up the responsibility and the baton of Julia de Burgos' work.
Julia de Burgos.
Not quite the word, but yeah.
Scepter. That's Julia de Burgos. If you don't know, Julia de Burgos is a national poet too. a master. Ángela. This book, es una compilación de poemas del 69 al 77. Y es su primer poemario, ella sola, después de haber hecho anteriormente un poemario con el poeta José María Lima, mi padre, se llamaba Homenaje al Ombligo.
So, Animal Fiero Tierno is her first solo collection after co-writing a book, very beautiful book called Homenaje al Ombligo. Guess Homage the Belly Button, the translation. And this is her first book she wrote, just Angela Maria Davila. It was written from the years of 1969 to about 1976, 77 when it was published.
Y ella tenía, Ángela como políticamente nacionalista, albisuista, fue una luchadora por la independencia de nuestro país, en contra del imperialismo yanqui, donde estamos ahora mismo. No estamos en el imperialismo, esto es territorio libre. Traduce eso.
Más o menos, pero estoy con
Free zone, free zone.
Free zone. Sí,
Okay.
lo reclamamos. Okay.
¿Ok? Ella se negó. Es bien interesante porque Ángela se niega a traducir su poesía al inglés, pero a la misma vez ella ama la diáspora, la defiende, la protege, la explica y como una mamá gallina. Entonces, si quieres eso para decirlo de...
Sí, hay par de cosas. So she's nationalist. She's Puerto Rican nationalist, very different than just nationalist. And she is also right albisuista, right, a follower of Pedro Albizu Campos. She believed in the independence of Puerto Rico, and she had no real interest in having her work translated, because she had this very strong sense of not wanting to situate herself in the Yankee Empire. Voy a dejar Yankee así porque
Sí.
una palabra no se traduce muy bien. But what's very important to note is that she did very much love the diaspora, and she had a very strong connection with the Puerto Rican diaspora, and so it's a little more complicated than just her not wanting her work translated. Eso lo añadí yo.
Sí. Entonces, toda su vida fue comadre de Pedro Pietri. Y su libro favorito era Obituario puertorriqueño, que está escrito en español y en inglés. Y ella, para ella, Obituario puertorriqueño era una obra maestra, precisamente porque ella quería que nosotros en la isla conociéramos a Pedro. Entonces, para cerrar, yo sé espiritualmente que en este momento de la historia de nuestra humanidad y de nuestro pueblo y de la diáspora y de los que vivimos en la isla, ella hubiera estado muy de acuerdo, porque si no, no estuviéramos aquí, porque yo me debo llevar, ¿qué pensaría? Ella tuviera 80 años y yo sé que ella estuviera muy contenta porque en este momento su poesía estuviera en inglés, para que ustedes la puedan conocer.
So she was very, very close with Pedro Pietri, and they had a very close relationship. And Pietri's work, of course, historically is in English and Spanish, but primarily in English. And there's... Yello is talking about how he feels, essentially, right? And how his mother... He imagines his mother. You imagine your mother would have felt. She would have been about 80-something now. And that you feel that she would very much have wanted and enjoyed and been glad to see her work translated into English so that we can hear it here. ¿Te parece?
Sí.
¿Te parece? Dale.
Ella ama la juventud.
She loves youth.
Love what?
Loves young people. and loves you.
She very, very glad now, right now.
Definitely.
She's here.
That's it. Lena.
Yeah.
And you all feel free to jump in, but maybe just sort of thinking about a resistance on the one hand to translate into English, and thinking about that in terms of Susan's work, and which has so deftly both theorized documentary poetry while practicing it in the book at the same time. And from the piece that you read, one of the things that stands out to me so much is the translation that doesn't happen for the migrant detainees when they are in court, and they are often, as I think you're saying in the book, and agreeing to guilty sentences for which they do not necessarily understand the language for. And we were talking a little bit last week in class about the kind of history of famous trials where things weren't translated, like Joan of Arc 10 and Tufak Amaru in the Americas, and all the sentenced death without knowing what for. And so I was just thinking about how both, I guess, translation and lack of translation is kin to your kind of larger thinking about documentary, and just wondering if you could respond to some of those ideas.
I think in the case of just specifically of Operation Streamline, what's interesting is it's both the translation and not translation, and then the opportunity. I think there is, even if the migrants, and many of them do understand the proceeding, they meet with lawyers for 5 minutes before they go in. There's just no option. But then, of course, there are always migrants for whom neither English nor Spanish is their first language, and that becomes another sort of difficulty. So it's to kind of resort to a cliche, but it's the power of language to shape reality and possibility, and the importance of access. Well, there's the importance in both ways. Translated, what is not translated, where agency exists. And then I think the other thing that I continue to be interested in relation to documentary poetics is how stories do or do not get valued. What does it mean to value a story? What does it mean to not allow a narrative? So the striking thing about Operation Streamline for me as well is that you can access no information about these migrants from witnessing the proceedings, which is the access that we have to this process as U.S. citizens. All you can find out from the court dockets are their names, their language proficiency, the name of their lawyer, the where they entered the U.S. So there's also a sort of stripping away of language, of narrative, of possibility in that ritualization. And I think as writers, I was just having a conversation with Giancarlo about archives. I also realizing I don't know if I should be speaking in English or Spanish, so we'll just slide back and forth. But the way that the archive itself is a place of limiting information, as is the poem, right? As is the essay. And so how can we also be aware in our own work of the kinds of archival practices? What are we replicating? What are we leaving out? I don't know if that's a good start to answer that question.
No, but what didn't? I think we lists of questions for what also.
Hold it. But yeah, I was going to ask, when you write these poems and stuff, what is your writing process? You set a vibe or something, or it's and writing the process about writing? How do you go about that?
That's for you.
When that's not.
Oh, yeah. I don't know. I kind of want to pass it off to my compañero here because he just finished a book of poetry. So it's going to be published by the University of Chicago. You might have heard of it.
So I'm really glad that you talked about setting a vibe. Just wondering about what the last, 15 minutes or so have been like for folks in this room. We have habits of assembly that some folks talk about. This guy, Manolo Callahan, talks about we have to revise our habits of assembly. And then Fred Moten and others pick that up and repeat it. We have to revise our habits of assembly, and this is a habit of assembly right now, the way that we're organized. And I wonder if in the last 15 minutes you've had to maybe tighten and narrow your attention to track what's been happening. And if in that labor you thought you were being rigorous or well-trained or more deserving of a scholarship than the person next to you who wasn't able to tighten their attention and track for 15 minutes. And so I'm just interested in the habits of assembly that institutions tell us are normal or that we kind of accept. And I bring it up because I just came out of a meeting with my own university where, vibrating with rage, fighting over resources. And institutions tend to train us in their modality of competency so that we can talk back to them. And that tends to be a lot of gaslighting and Baroque rhetoric to make the gaslighting look real. And so in response or in a way to find space outside of that habit of assembly, I'm curious about how we can be soft, how we can practice being soft. And I think that is part of setting a vibe for writing a poem. And I have a text thread with a few Arab American poets right now. So my background is, my mother's family is from Syria. They emigrated from Syria to Peru, where I was born. And my father's Andean, Peruvian mestizo. And so in this text thread with other Arab American writers, one of the questions that has come up since the Israeli attack in Gaza and before is, how do we stay soft? And when this question came up recently, Carolina Abid responded this way. She said, Cecilia Vicuña said at a reading, "Welcome to this very moment. Everything around you is alive." And Carolina Abid, my friend, has to repeat this to herself to go soft again, right? And I think that cultivation of softness is something that is necessary to writing a poem.
Gracias, Farid. Do you hear me despite the mask? Yeah. It's very moving for me to be in this room with all of you. And I have the feeling that you feel that we are moved to be here with you. And this is not a habit. This is something real, and it is afforded to us by the loving care that Daniel has put into, and Rachel and all the people who worked in bringing us. We know how difficult it is to get the funds. We know how difficult it is to even think of these things in this time. And I would say that I will say a little bit about each one. And first of all, the first time I came across this book by Susan Briante, I was moved to the core because one of my first jobs when I found myself suddenly living in New York, which was a total accident, was to be a translator at Kurt. And I couldn't take the job for more than maybe 2 or 3 months because the pain of being a witness of the abuse was so brutal that each time I got home ill, sick from feeling the abuse. So to find a poet that so beautifully captured that way in which the legality of U.S. behavior is a complete reversal of what ought to be legal in any nation in the world, which is not only what is happening with all the immigrants, but it's what is happening as well in Gaza. I just learned how to pronounce Gaza, and it's hard for me to even say that, trying to imitate the way the Palestinian people say it, which of course for me recalls what happened to us in Chile. So this is a constant of a behavior of transforming what should be completely legal, the abuse of other human beings, into a sort of theater piece of what legality is. And we live in this lie, and this lie is what is killing this earth, not only killing people, killing the environment, killing everything, but it's this theater of hypocrisy and lies in which we live. So to counter that, nothing more beautiful than to see the testimony of total love that you have for your mother and that you have for that love. So beyond the beauty of the fantastic translation and of the poems themselves, it is an act of love. And if anything is going to transform this situation in which we are bleeding to the extinction of humanity and this extinction of humanness, of kindness, is precisely what you brought up. You brought like the medicine, and it's so beautiful. Muchas gracias, amigas y amigos, and
First of all, thank you, everyone. It's such an honor for us at UIC to have each and every one of you. So I can't wait to spend the next 2 days just learning from you and with you. Susan, I wrote down that you said that essays and poems and archives are a way of leaving out information. And I know you work with blackout poetry, and I wonder for each of you, can leaving out information be generative, creative? Can it lead to ways of like revealing something, new possibilities, new worlds? What's generative about leaving out anything?
Yeah, I mean, so that's sort of the underlying notion of redacted poetry, right? One of my favorite examples of redaction is by Hugo Garcia Manriquez, Anti-Humboldt, which is a redaction of NAFTA, of the free trade agreement. I'm like blanking on what's the English translation for it? The North American Free Trade Agreement. Right. I was like, what's the N? And you know, in sort of highlighting what's there, in leaving out, I saw a really fantastic panel many years ago in which he participated, and he was asked like, what stood out to you? Because redacting a document, if we're talking about an external text, redacting a document becomes a really intimate form of reading and getting to know the document. And he responded, the word people never appears in this whole agreement, right? So there's an attention to what a document leaves out. There's an attention. He was able to highlight by blanking out certain words, other things that were in the document and what was repeated in the document. But I think also when we're writing our own poems, so there's just, it's not a negative or a positive, but just that I try to always be aware and to make my students in creative writing, any of my students, aware of like, what's the frame we're bringing to the question that we're asking, the writing that we're producing, and then what is being left out, and how can we account for that on the page? Not necessarily to force an inclusion, but to not normalize what is not there. if that makes sense.
Maybe before we transition, maybe to
We're trying to.
I'm here.
I'm doing some interpreting. It's not. We're not like everybody.
It's not a tale.
Oh my God,
not a
it's
tale.
horrible. No. Yeah, oh my God, no.
Okay.
I was like,
Again, we start.
sorry, keep moving the table.
Thinking about, hablando de lo que hablaban sobre traducción cuando alguien quizás no quiere ser traducido o resistencia al imperio. No sé si hay estrategias o tácticas que uno puede usar en ese momento, pero más como like, how does that affect you as a translator when you know that the writer is both resistant to English and resistant to being consumed by empire at the same time, and just what that means for both for this about it.
¿Tú quieres primero?
Sí.
Dale. Vamos. No importa. Estamos chilling.
En mi caso, como artista que pues no soy un intelectual, ¿verdad? Pero me crié con dos. Y entonces en mi caso, pues, que yo conozco también como el pensamiento de Ángela María Dávila. Entonces, viendo como una persona, un artista revolucionario, como yo le llame, eso está ligado a la sabiduría del cambio, a cómo tú te enfrentas y tomas posturas ante los cambios sociales, ante los cambios emocionales, ante los cambios espirituales, etcétera, los cambios económicos. Entonces, es un poco lo que...
Una pausita para...
se me olvida. Voy por ahí, wow.
No.
Gracias,
Súper,
gracias.
súper. No, está bien.
Hasta ahí también, que no se me olvide lo que...
In his case, right, like being the child of two intellectuals, but not intellectual himself, but still having right that proximity, and also really knowing how Ángela María Dávila thought. What he's saying is that essentially there's. Let's see, yo. Fue tan bonito.
Lo que pasa es que cuando Ángela María Dávila es una artista revolucionaria y eso implica que tú eres agua, que tú estás dispuesto al cambio, que tú recibes los cambios que hay y los procesas. Entonces los tiras en la poesía. Entonces...
Yeah, so basically the Ángela María Dávila, being a revolutionary artist, saw being a revolutionary artist as being open to change, receiving change, being able to like have that move through the work and through oneself.
Pero tengo que decir algo. Voy a partir de que es un atrevimiento mío porque yo no soy la poeta. Pero me estoy dando esa licencia porque soy artista, la entiendo, la represento y muy importante... eso, traduce eso.
So, I'm going to like sort of step out of maybe go a little far, maybe step out of my comfort zone because I'm an artist, I'm not the poet, I'm not her, so I'm going to like kind of speak for her in this moment.
Quizás si otra persona lo hiciera, yo no me gustaría.
Maybe if someone else did it, I wouldn't like it.
Pero hay algo muy importante que tiene que ver con el camino espiritual. El aire no lo vemos si existe.
So there's something very important that has to do with one's spiritual path. The air, if we don't see the air, it doesn't exist.
Igual el plano espiritual.
The same occurs in the spiritual plane.
Y yo trabajo con mi madre en el plano espiritual.
And I work with my mother on the spiritual plane.
Y tengo la certeza, vuelvo otra vez y lo repito, por esa razón espiritual que va más allá del intelecto, que ella estuviera acorde con el cambio. Incluso ese poema que leímos no dice hermana, por la época en que se vive, que se incluye a todos en hermano.
So I know because I spoke to her on the spiritual plane, and I'm sure that she would be comfortable with the change that took place. In fact, the poem that we read doesn't say hermanas, it only says hermanos, because at the time the O was inclusive of everyone.
Porque mi hija menor, mi hijo, hije, I'm in this process. Gira Maria Lima Abrams is Sam. I'm learn this. I'm a tempest, emotional, but I'm a great father. I'm a good person. And I've learned these changes powerful. It's the reality. And Ángela María, si ella estuviera viva con una nieta que está pasando por este proceso, ella hubiera cambiado ese pueblo. Yo estoy seguro de eso. Aunque no entendiera la mitad de lo que está pasando, ella lo honraría y apoyaría a su nieta y moldearía como el agua interna que tenemos su obra poética. Porque es que es un ser de luz poderoso. Entonces los poetas tenemos un compromiso muy grande porque somos alquimistas.
I'm just going to translate the last part. Basically, now I'm dealing with having a child that's going through these changes and these gender changes. And, I definitely, that is something that I know that if Ángela María Dávila were alive today, she would be very accepting of her grandchild and also would change that in the poem, because the world is changing, water is changing, it's moving through us. And the poet is an alchemist.
Los poetas somos alquimistas. Y eso trae una responsabilidad. Porque la palabra crece más allá del intelecto. Se convierte en un símbolo y en un arquetipo espiritual, vivo, cuando tú la oyes, cuando se de aquí vive. Por eso la responsabilidad de revolucionar nuestra mirada hacia el mundo y nuestra mirada a nuestra propia poesía.
That one's going to be hard. But estamos ahí.
¿Cómo?
Estoy pensando cómo traducir todo
Okay.
eso de forma simple, pero
Los poetas son alquimistas.
poetas son alquimistas. Yeah. Poets are alchemists, and also, that's part of the responsibility. And language is very powerful, and it's something that we can kind of create a world with.
Y más allá,
Very free.
y va más allá del intelecto,
And
la
goes
poesía,
beyond intelligence
y se convierte en un símbolo vivo.
and becomes a living symbol.
Think. Yes.
You vote. Yes, and then we're gonna for round two.
So, just thinking about exactly what they said and the question of leaving things out. So I'm so glad you said what you said. Thank you, because it we tend to confuse print and the book with something that's definitive. But what you're pointing to is a spiritual energy that is up for revision and revolution, right? And into the question of redaction or leaving things out, like that revolution can't happen if you all don't keep writing to move something along, right? We desperately need you. And the revolution needs you, right? That turning. And so, and what I'm getting at is that as somebody who's privileged to work with undergraduates and graduate students at different stages in their own relationship to their own writing, sometimes leaving things out of the page, sometimes leaving things out is incredibly necessary for where they are in their lives. And the beautiful predicament is that we can't get away from ourselves. And so 15 years later, 5 years later, 7 years later, you might be ready to put things on the page that you couldn't put on the page with your first book, right? And so sometimes we feel guilt or shame about not being the artist that somewhere in the back of our heads we think we need to be, but we need it to be a long road. We want you writing for years and years and years and years to come, and precisely to create the aqueduct for the water, right?
That is coming down the table.
Of that revolution. So just a quick plug to give yourselves permission and to envision yourselves as folks who will be making art for decades to come.
Everybody.